That evening, I walked into the party thinking it would be just another ordinary night. The lights shimmered across the room, music filled the air, and laughter echoed everywhere, but inside me there was a strange emptiness I couldn't ignore. I smiled, greeted friends, and played the role of someone who was completely fine, but deep down I felt a hollow space that had been growing quietly for months. My partner had been distant for so long, buried in work, distracted, and barely noticing when I tried to reach out. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that things would get better, yet the loneliness had begun to feel like part of my daily life. As the evening unfolded, I found myself standing near the corner of the room, watching people dance, couples laughing together, sharing inside jokes. A pang of envy struck me, though I tried to hide it behind a sip of my drink. That was when a stranger's eyes met mine. It wasn't just a glance, it was the kind of look that lingers, the kind that makes you feel as if someone has seen straight through you. He smiled, not the casual kind but one that carried a spark, as though he already knew a secret about me that even I hadn't admitted. He walked over, confident but not arrogant, and started a conversation. At first, it was light, comments about the music, the energy of the night, the simple kind of talk you expect at a party. But as the minutes slipped away, our words grew heavier. I found myself laughing in ways I hadn't in months, letting my guard down without realizing it. He listened with a kind of attention I had been craving, his eyes never drifting away, his presence pulling me closer without a single touch. Every part of me knew this was dangerous. I could hear the voice in my head whispering, "You have someone waiting for you at home. Don't cross a line you can't step back from." And yet, another voice, quieter but stronger, told me, "This is what you've been missing. This is the feeling you've been searching for." My heart battled between the two, torn apart by loyalty and temptation. I tried to step back, to remind myself of who I was and what I had promised, but the loneliness of the past months weighed on me like chains. And here, in the middle of the crowded room, was someone who made me feel alive again. His questions weren't shallow, his compliments weren't rehearsed. He asked about my dreams, my passions, the little things I thought no one cared about anymore. With each word, I felt myself leaning closer, caught in a web I hadn't planned to walk into. The party seemed to fade into the background. The music blurred, the people became silhouettes, and all that remained was this strange connection growing between us. Time moved differently. Minutes felt like hours, and I couldn't remember the last time I had been so absorbed in someone's presence. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition, as if he had appeared in my life exactly when I was most vulnerable. As the night drew on, he asked me if I wanted to step outside for some fresh air. I hesitated. My mind screamed no, but my body moved before my heart could catch up. We walked into the cool night, leaving behind the noise and chaos of the party. Under the dim glow of the streetlights, the silence between us felt louder than any music. He looked at me in a way that made it impossible to hide my emotions. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, understood, and wanted. I told myself it was just a conversation, just harmless attention. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was the beginning of something I couldn't easily control. The spark had been lit, and even though I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the fire inside me had already begun to spread. That night, as I finally said goodbye and walked back home, my thoughts were no longer with the person waiting for me. They were with him, the stranger who had turned my ordinary evening into the start of a secret I wasn't sure I could keep hidden. The days after that night felt strangely different, as though the party had left behind more than just faint memories. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every ordinary moment, pouring my morning coffee, sitting at work, even lying beside my partner at night, was interrupted by flashes of his smile, the way he listened, the way I had felt alive for the first time in so long. I tried to shake it off, to dismiss it as nothing more than a fleeting encounter, but it lingered, deepening with each passing day. It began innocently, Or at least that's what I told myself. A text here, a casual message there. Somehow, he had found a way to reach out, and I didn't resist. I convinced myself it was harmless, just friendly conversation, nothing more. But soon, the messages stretched into late nights. We spoke about everything: dreams, fears, little jokes that only we shared. He became the voice I waited for, the distraction I craved, the piece of my day that made the rest of it bearable. Each vibration of my phone filled me with excitement I couldn't explain. I found myself hiding the screen, tilting it away whenever my partner was nearby, deleting conversations before they could be seen. With every small lie, a knot of guilt tightened in my chest, but alongside the guilt was something undeniable: the thrill of secrecy, the intoxicating rush of knowing I was keeping something for myself. The first time we decided to meet outside of the party felt like crossing an invisible line. I told myself it was just coffee, just a simple chat between two people who happened to enjoy each other's company. But when I saw him waiting for me, my heart skipped in ways it hadn't for years. His presence pulled me in, and every word he spoke made me want to stay longer, to forget the rest of the world and exist only in that moment. It didn't take long for one meeting to become another, and then another. Our conversations grew deeper, and so did the silence I carried back home. I noticed myself drifting away from my partner, avoiding eye contact, making excuses for why I seemed distracted. I tried to mask it with smiles and small talk, but inside I knew the truth. I was living two lives, and the lines between them were blurring quickly. The more time I spent with him, the harder it became to ignore the emotions stirring inside me. He made me feel wanted in ways I had long forgotten. His compliments weren't just about how I looked but about who I was. He noticed details, the way I thought, the little quirks no one else seemed to see. It felt like he held a mirror up to the parts of me I had buried beneath years of routine and neglect. One evening, as we sat together in his car, parked on a quiet street away from prying eyes, the silence between us became unbearable. I felt the weight of everything pressing down: the lies, the risk, the forbidden pull of what we both knew was happening. He reached for my hand, and for a moment I froze. The world around me seemed to pause. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in my ears, louder than the stillness of the night. And then, without another thought, I let myself give in. The touch that followed was electric, both terrifying and exhilarating. It was as if the months of emptiness inside me had suddenly cracked open, flooding with warmth, danger, and desire. I knew this was the moment of no return, the step I had sworn I would never take. Yet in that instant, I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to think of consequences or promises. All I wanted was to feel the fire that had been missing from my life for so long. When I finally returned home that night, I could barely look at myself in the mirror. My reflection was both familiar and unrecognizable. I saw the same face I had always seen, but behind the eyes was a new truth: I was no longer the person I had been before. I had crossed into a place where guilt and passion lived side by side, and I wasn't sure if I could ever step back. I lay awake for hours, my partner asleep beside me, breathing steadily as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The secret burned inside me, both heavy and intoxicating, and I realized that the life I had built was beginning to crack under the weight of a choice I could no longer undo. The days turned into weeks, and what started as fleeting glances and secret conversations had become something I could no longer hide, at least not from myself. My life had split in two. In one world, I played the role of the faithful partner, smiling at dinners, pretending to listen to stories I had heard 100 times before, nodding at questions I didn't even register. In the other world, I was someone entirely different, someone alive, reckless, and consumed by a connection that felt impossible to let go. But cracks began to show. My partner, though distracted most of the time, wasn't blind. They noticed the way I held my phone closer, the way I disappeared into other rooms to reply to messages, the sudden excuses about being busy or staying late. At first, the questions were subtle. Who was that calling? Or, you've been distracted lately. I brushed them off with practiced ease, forcing a laugh, giving half answers. But suspicion, once planted, has a way of growing. I could feel the tension at home, the silence stretching longer at the dinner table, the glances that lingered too long, filled with unspoken doubt. Each evening, guilt hung over me like a shadow, yet even then, I couldn't stop. The thought of cutting ties with him felt like suffocating, like willingly stepping back into the loneliness I had barely escaped. So I held on, clinging tighter to the secret that was slowly unraveling everything around me. One afternoon, I caught myself staring at him across a cafe table, realizing how much of my happiness had become tangled up in his presence. The world outside the window moved on as usual, but inside, I was fighting a storm of emotions. Part of me wanted to freeze this moment forever, to live in the safety of our hidden world where nothing else mattered. The other part trembled at the thought of what might happen if this fragile balance shattered. The lies grew heavier. I found myself rehearsing excuses in my head before walking through the door at home, planning stories before questions were even asked. I began to fear the sound of my own phone, the way a message could appear at the wrong time, the way a glance could give everything away. Nights became restless. I would lie beside my partner, listening to the quiet rhythm of their breathing, and wonder how long it would be before they finally saw the truth written across my face. Then came the night that changed everything. I had just returned home, my heart still racing from the hours I had spent with him, when my partner's voice cut through the silence. They asked me directly, no hesitation, no soft edge to the words, "Is there someone else?" The room seemed to collapse around me. My throat went dry, my mind spun with panic. For a moment, I almost confessed, almost let the truth spill out and end the torment of secrecy. But fear won. I shook my head, forcing tears into my eyes, insisting that nothing was wrong. They stared at me for a long time, searching for something in my expression, and though they didn't press further, I knew the doubt had only deepened. After that, every encounter with him carried a new weight. The thrill of secrecy was no longer innocent. It was sharpened by the fear of exposure. Every touch, every word whispered in the dark, felt both irresistible and dangerous. I told myself I could manage it, that I was careful, but deep down I knew the truth. Things were spiraling out of my control. Friends began to notice too. A close friend asked me why I seemed distant, why my smile felt forced, why I seemed to vanish for hours without explanation. I laughed it off, but the look in their eyes told me they weren't convinced. It was as though the universe was slowly peeling back the layers of my lie, daring me to confront what I had done. And yet, despite the mounting pressure, I couldn't stop. The pull was too strong. Even as the walls of my life trembled, I kept returning to him, like a moth circling a flame it knows will burn. With each passing day, I wondered not if the truth would come out, but when, and what pieces of my world would be left standing when it did. That was the reality I carried into every quiet moment, every restless night. I had chosen a path I could not undo, and now I was trapped between two lives, knowing it was only a matter of time before they collided in the most devastating way. The unraveling began quietly, almost imperceptibly, until it was no longer something I could control. One evening, I came home to find my partner sitting in silence, my phone placed on the table in front of them. My heart stopped. I didn't need to ask what had happened, I already knew. Somehow, somewhere, a message had slipped through the cracks. A careless word, a trace of a secret that could no longer be hidden. The look in their eyes pierced deeper than any words could. It wasn't rage at first, nor even shock, but a kind of hollow devastation, as though the ground had given way beneath them. When they asked me again if there was someone else, their voice trembled, not with suspicion this time, but with certainty. My lies, so carefully constructed, collapsed in an instant. The truth spilled out, not because I chose to confess, but because silence had become impossible. I tried to explain, stumbling over excuses and apologies, but nothing I said could erase the betrayal. They listened without interruption, their face unreadable, and when I finished, the quiet that followed was unbearable. It was the silence of something breaking, a bond, a trust, perhaps even a future. In the days that followed, the house became a battlefield of emotions. Sometimes there were tears, sometimes anger, sometimes the chilling indifference of someone who has been wounded beyond words. I found myself pleading for forgiveness, promising to end everything, swearing it had meant nothing compared to what we had built together. But even as the words left my lips, I knew they sounded hollow. Because the truth was, it had meant something. It had meant enough to risk everything for. I ended things with him, though even calling it an ending felt like a betrayal of my own heart. The last time we spoke, his voice carried both understanding and quiet disappointment. He said he had known this day would come, that secrets like ours were never meant to last. As I hung up, I felt a part of myself collapse, as though I had severed a lifeline I wasn't ready to live without. But the greater loss loomed at home. My partner's trust was gone, and with it, the stability of the life we had shared. The smallest interactions became weighted, passing each other in the hallway, brushing against one another at the table, sharing the same space yet feeling miles apart. Sometimes they would look at me with a sadness that cut deeper than anger ever could, and I would wish I could go back, undo the choices that had led us here. Nights were the hardest, lying beside someone who no longer reached for me, no longer whispered good night, was a torment I had never imagined. I replayed every moment that had brought me to this point, the loneliness, the thrill, the choices made in shadows, and realized how quickly desire could consume a life built on years of love and trust. Friends eventually heard whispers of what had happened. Some offered comfort, some judgment, most a mixture of both. I could see in their eyes the question they didn't dare ask, was it worth it? And that question echoed in my mind day after day, with no clear answer. In the quiet aftermath, I learned something about betrayal that I hadn't understood before. It doesn't just break the person who has been betrayed, it breaks the betrayer too. It leaves scars on both sides, reminders that even the deepest passion cannot erase the damage left behind. I often think about that night at the party, the moment when everything began. It seemed so small then, just a glance, a spark. But sparks can burn down entire worlds if you let them. And I had let mine. Now, when I look at what remains of the life I once had, I see pieces that may never fit together again. Maybe time will heal some of it, maybe forgiveness will come in fragments, or maybe this chapter has already closed for good. What I know for certain is that choices carry weight, and no secret affair, no fleeting moment of passion, is ever truly hidden. The truth finds its way out, and when it does, it asks a price far greater than you imagine. I am left with the memory of two lives, one where I was faithful but empty, and one where I was alive but dishonest. And standing between them, I finally understand the cost of chasing something forbidden. In the end, you risk losing everything, including yourself.